Good morning, everybody. It's 11 o'clock. I think we should probably get going. Our guest this week is Prashant Khemka from the Ashoko White Oak Emerging Markets, which is obviously a relatively new fund, the latest to launch. So it would be interesting to see how they're getting on. But a few bits of news before that. As is usual, recently, we get to Friday morning and I think, oh, there's nothing to talk about. And then there's a rush of stuff. But so three things that I've pulled out there: Ecofin US, RM Infrastructure Income, and Roundhill Music. Ecofin US first. I'm slightly annoyed with them. Has to be said. We published a note this morning. We sort of went on our website yesterday, and you may have been emailed it this morning. And we've talked about this before. They had this issue where the fund manager left and that pushed it out to a discount. They've recruited a new one, so that seems to be moving in the right direction. Then they've had this other issue where a tornado took out the wind farm's connection to the power grid, and that's going to restrict the amount of cash that it can earn from that asset for a little while. And those are clear problems that needed addressing, but I think are fixable. Nevertheless, the discount really widened out, and that has obviously stopped it growing. So what the board announced this morning, completely out of the blue, was that they've launched a strategic review. They've said that, as we very strongly suspected, they tried to merge with US Solar when US Solar launched its strategic review. That approach was rejected. And I'm not sure why that would have been, because it just makes eminent sense just to knock the two together, so they're doing the same thing, but there we go. They also said that they were approached by another renewables company. I'm not sure who that would have been. Logically, in my head, the only one that makes real sense is SDCL, but I don't know that, so let's not speculate. Nevertheless, the board said we didn't think it was in shareholders' best interest, so we decided not to do that. I think given what they're doing now, it would have been useful to know a bit more about what the offer was. Nevertheless, so what they said is we want to maximise value for shareholders. So the first thing they've done is that they're going out and they're hiring a financial advisor to help them sell a portfolio. I have no idea how much they're going to get paid. All of the costs associated with all of these things are racking up across the whole sector. There's a lot of lawyers and brokers and people making very decent money out of these reconstructions, but there we go. This advisor's been told, go away, see if you can sell the portfolio. And if you can, we'll then hand the cash back to shareholders and the company will be wound up. I do think that's a real shame. Obviously, there's our hype, but as I say, that's now a bit out of date. There are obvious problems with it. Their ongoing charge is too high, at 1.8%, and that's because it's a small fund. That market cap of 87 million is reflective of that 31% discount. And it did need to expand to make sense, and the combination with US Solar would have been doing that. Even after the dividend cut that they've been forced to put through because of the events with the tornado, it's still on a 5.6% yield, but it would have been on an 8.3% yield if you just go back to the normal level of dividend. And I do think all of this is fixable, and if we just give it a bit more time, it would have been okay. And I think for those reasons, I think if they come back and say we think we can sell the portfolio, but we're not going to get anywhere near like NAV for it, I think investors should just say no, let's just keep going. But let's just wait and see what happens. It's obviously too early to speculate. RM Infrastructure Income, again, we've talked about this quite a few times. The most recent thing was obviously that they were talking about merging with GCP Infrastructure. And as somebody suggested there, maybe GCP approached Ecofin. I don't think they would have done. I think that's a bit too much of a stretch, but there we go. Nevertheless, so here the problem was COVID, really, and the provision that they had to make in the NAV for possible losses associated with COVID, most of which then didn't materialise, so the NAV just came back again. Nevertheless, that unnerved people, and it went to a discount. It didn't really close properly. And then more recently, I suppose there's worries about recession and maybe defaults, and or we haven't really seen much of that. And also because the rates have been going up, that obviously depresses the value of the current portfolio. But it should be that as they make new loans, then the yield of the fund goes up. They capture some of that. And nevertheless, that's not going to happen now because they are not going to carry on investing. So the GCP merger has already been ruled out. Again, I think that might come down to the costs, actually. They weren't cheap in what they were talking about. And trying to get all of it done at the same time, it wouldn't have made a lot of sense to do the GCP infrastructure, GCP asset-backed income merger, get that done, and then come back and do another one. It just would mean a whole other set of costs. So that might be why it's not going to happen. So instead, they are going to go in this managed wind down route. Again, I think it's a shame. It was doing a good job. It seems to be doing a good job, but it's really comes back down to this thing that's too small. So they are going to push ahead with publishing a circulator to shareholders. Obviously, shareholders need to approve this idea. There may be an opportunity to switch your investment in the fund into a different fund structure. They haven't said what that might be. I'm guessing it might be like a limited partnership type thing, in which case it's not really going to work for retail investors. It might work for professional ones. This is what the maturity profile of the portfolio looks like. So that just gives you an idea. So they can get a lot of the money back within about 18 months. But there is sort of a longer tail there. So if it's going to really come down to, can they actually sell that portfolio rather than wait for it to mature? And if there is money rolling into another fund, there may be cash available to help manage all of that, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens. And then the other big one, surprise of the day, the bid for Roundhill Music royalty. So I don't know if you spotted this yet, but here we go. The NAV climbs and climbs and climbs. The share price does not quite make that, and actually starts to fall away as interest rates have been going up. And the discounts have been getting wider and wider and wider. I suppose that there has been this long-standing question over how accurate the NAV was, but this bid seems to have given light to that. So the NAV is said this morning to be $1.30, and that's up again from where it was at the end of June, where it was $1.27. And that's been driven by the recent acquisition they did recently. So they bought a catalogue and they've written up. And if you remember with these funds, they're publishing two different NAVs. So one of them is an NAV based on accounting standards, IFRS accounting standards, where they buy something and then they depreciate it over time. But they were strongly arguing it doesn't work. That's not the way that this business works. These things actually don't necessarily lose value over time. Sometimes they actually appreciate in value. And so therefore, instead of using that accounting NAV, we're going to publish another one based on discounted cash flows, which is the economic NAV, the $1.30. And the bids come in much, much closer to that than to the IFRS NAV, which kind of proves, I think, their point. And it's a whopping great premium to the previous share price. So 67% premium, which works at about 11.5% discount. So that's still quite chunky. But I think it's a lot more acceptable than where we were with Civitas bid, if you remember that. There's also some dividend income to come. So they've got about 1.65 cents worth of dividend income that they're going to, they have declared or they will declare before the bid goes through. The buyer has been hoovering up these catalogues for a while. It's a private fund called Concord. And they say that they are looking at other potential transactions. Now, Roundhill's much more, because I saw the question pop up there about hypnosis. This is a much more bite-sized chunk than hypnosis. Hypnosis is about 4 or 5 times the size of Roundhill. So maybe it's too big, but nevertheless, you think there might be some read across. Given where the bids come in at and the fact that the board have recommended it, they've already got around a third of shareholders saying they're going to approve this. It could still get blocked. I think it's unlikely, unless there's another bid comes along. I mean, I wouldn't rule that out entirely. We have seen sort of counter bids, it just hasn't happened for a while. But they're trying to get it all done and dusted by the 1st of November. So we'll have to see. And then we'll just have to see, as why no bid for Song yet? Do you think one will come? You'd have to think that if somebody thinks Roundhill's worth this sort of money, then Song is looking very undervalued, because it was on a slightly wider discount to Roundhill Music last night. And so, yeah, this could be the end for the London listed music funds. To us, the last question has just come in. Yeah, because these things, if shareholders aren't going to put proper values on them, then private buyers are going to come along and snap them up. And I don't think that applies just to this sector. I think it applies to other things too. I think I've answered all of those questions one way or another. There's one question about RM's costs as it shrinks. With these funds in wind down, you do get a sort of build up of costs, because you can't get rid of their listing costs, the cost of the board and everything else that easily. So technically the ongoing charge sort of ratio does pile up. At some point it might be worth delisting it. They're going to keep it listing for listed for as long as they can, I think, to keep people able to deal in the shares. And I think that's it. So that's enough, I think, from me.